Well, I want to greet each one this evening in Jesus' name. It's good to see all of you here. What are you afraid of? Anybody here afraid of anything? Well, I'm going to tell you, when the Fresh Start staff and the Deeper Life staff plan seminars, we each get kind of an opportunity to pick topics that we think we'd like to tackle. And this is the second time I've picked a topic on fear of man, in the last couple seminars that we've done, for one main reason, and that's because that's been a big issue in my life, has been the fear of man. So it's been very helpful not only to study it and to present it, but like somebody else mentioned, it's a common theme that when you teach something, you learn something. And so I've made that something of a thing in my life to deal with. So in some of my reading, I read somewhere that one person said that in a room of 100 people, 100 of them will have the fear of man to some degree or another. So I'm not going to take a survey here, but I would say it's probably a common problem. It's a crippling problem, and it's a factor that many people face in life. And I think that many of the topics that have been given in this seminar, in some way or another, are affected or have fear as a part of them. So therefore, this topic, I want to look at some principles that may help as you help someone else dealing with their issues of fear. Of course, yeah, it's always helpful to be familiar with the issue yourself, but you don't always have to be. Doesn't mean everyone is crippled by the fear of man here, but we're all familiar with it. It involves the fear of what others think about us. Jesus was quite clear about this in many of his teachings, particularly in Matthew chapter 4, 6, 9, 10, and 24. He deals with fear in some way or another. And in some ways, he tells us how to deal with it. He says, don't worry. Don't worry about it. We had a topic on worry and anxiety here earlier, and that's very related to fear. Jesus warned us that parents will betray children, children will betray parents, brothers will betray sisters, and so forth. So he needed to remind people of this because their natural tendency is to fear those things. I think he was trying to prepare people for, and maybe explain what they experience. The basis of this fear is the worship of self, the desire for things, and it could be anything: preservation, gratification, self-esteem, comfort, pleasure. All those things are things that causes us to fear anything that would get in the way of getting them. And this is a form of idolatry. And I think as I get into this, those of you who have been here for yesterday and today will start recognizing some common themes throughout many of the topics that we've been given, and that's idolatry, worship, well, there's a third one, I can't remember what it was, but those issues, those are at the heart, basically in the heart is the third one I was thinking of. So self-worship is what we're doing when we have things that we want and we try to get them, and that's an affront against God. And it becomes deeply ingrained in us, in our character, in our way, in our behavior. The fear of man is something, it's just briefly listed in one verse in Proverbs. The fear of man is a snare. The Septuagint words it this way: people are overthrown by fearing and reverencing others unreasonably. So other terms for the fear of man are peer pressure, people-pleasing, codependency, basically all the same thing. But it's more than just being afraid of others. It's also kind of characterized by holding someone in awe, being controlled by people, being mastered by them, worshiping other people, and needing people. How do we recognize it? Well, I'm going to just throw a few quick things out here. If you're trying to take notes, this will be in print later, so don't fret. Are you struggling with peer pressure? Are you needing something from your spouse? Are you seeking to improve your self-esteem? Are telling little lies to cover things up something you're doing? Do you get angry or depressed? Are you avoiding people? Are you comparing yourself to others? And in my experience with the fear of man, I could check off a number of those. Do you have repeating anxious thoughts? Do you find others teasing you about being a worrywart? Do you have a nervous habit? Do you hesitate to make plans because you're worried that things won't turn out well? You have thoughts of the future filled with fear instead of hope. A number of ways to recognize it. But there's 5 principles that I'm going to cover. I'm going to try to be brief. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to just describe briefly the principle. And then I want to give steps, practical, realistic steps that you can do for your friend that you're helping with the fear of man, to try to help them grasp these 5 principles. This is basically a little curriculum, so to speak. So when you go home and you sit down with someone, I'm hoping that these can be realistic things. Now, this little curriculum is going to be embedded in your longer process of working with your friend. This isn't the answer. This is like the beginning, part 1 of your curriculum, perhaps. Because when you try to work with someone who's got a problem, they're probably very confused of why they do what they do, why they're so afraid of things, what's going on, and you don't know to begin with what's going on either. So you want to try to figure it out. But to work with them, you need to have a common language. You need to have a common understanding. You need to have common foundations to communicate. And when you want to communicate truths to this person, they need to have the common understanding of what you're trying to teach them. So these are some basic principles, of foundational principles of trying to understand what goes on inside of him or her, and that causes these problems. Then, and I'm going to give steps, and I'm going to give step 1, step 2, step 3. I know it was mentioned earlier that it's not just as simple as that. Helping a person is not just step 1, step 2, step 3. But you do have to do things, and we don't act in life in parallel. We can't do 10 things at once. So we do one thing at a time, and so there is kind of a little bit of sequence. But the principle they were saying, and I'm going to say, is that all of these principles are interactive and they're going on all at once. And except maybe from number 5, perhaps, which is some part of a means of making some corrections. But generally, these go on all together. So yes, it's not simply a matter of first you'll attack this one, and then you'll do this one, and then you'll do this one. But you do have to go after them one at a time. So as you are trying to be a helper, it's good to remember that you are standing in the place of Jesus. He's not here physically. He's not here to sit down at the table with your friend. So you're filling in for him. When I mentioned in the first topic, you're an agent. He's hired you, essentially, to do this on his behalf, in his name, calling on him for the help needed. So you are not the healer. Jesus is the healer. You are not the changer. He's the changer, but you're the agent of that change. So let's move on. Principle number 1, fear reveals what one worships. And this is one of those common themes. If you're taking notes or listening for the last today and yesterday, that theme is coming through loud and clear. And it's interesting that it comes up repeatedly in all of these different problem areas that have been discussed. Why? Because it's at the root of the problem, of all of these problems. So Jesus said to Satan, "Begone, Satan, for it's written, you shall worship the Lord your God, and him only shall you serve." Matthew 4:11, very familiar passage. And this reminder to Satan was not unique to Satan. It could have easily been said to any one of his disciples. Not that he would tell them to be gone, but the idea is that you need to worship the Lord your God, and him only will you serve. And at the end, I would remind us that we have basically 2 categories of worship options. One category, there's only a set of 3 in it, and that's the Trinity. That's the uncreated being that we can worship. The other category is all the created things. And all the created things are what get us in trouble. So Jesus reminded the Jews throughout the Old Testament stories that the focus he had with them was their focus of worship. That was the problem they had. Humans are made for worship, and the central factor in the makeup of humans is worship. We're designed for that. And all of the problems in the Old Testament were from the tendency to worship other things. So we as helpers and humans ourselves, we need to remember this principle as we start to help others even as we deal with ourselves. It's a primary aspect, and that is worship. So likely, like this concept is to some of you, maybe if you heard it the first time, it may be, you maybe catch on, but you may need to think about it a little bit. So your friend is going to need the same thing. You bring up this idea that your fear, one of the factors in your fear is what you worship. And he's going, what? Huh? What do you mean? I mean, I go to church. What do you mean by that? So we're going to have to get into that and help him understand what you mean. Paul said that we should not worship created things in Romans 1:25. An idol is something we use to worship gods other than God. It was stated a little clearer by somebody else today. The idol is the tool we use to worship the false god that we worship. So there's 2 things going on here. There's something that we worship, and then people like to create things that are tangible that they can use to worship the thing that they want to worship. For example, if I want to have, I want to be recognized for something, my greatness, my skills, then my job will likely be a tool I use to obtain what I worship. I worship being acclaimed and appreciated as a person, then there's a great opportunity for that in my job. So I worship acknowledgement, I worship being applauded, I worship praise. The job is the idol. The idol it's the tool I use to get what I want. Now, we can also use people. Like my wife can become an idol to obtain for me something that I want. Turns her into an idol, and I'm worshiping something. But idolatry, therefore, is fueled by 2 lies. One lie is that we need something. We want something so badly we feel like we need it. The other lie is that something created can give it to us. Those are the 2 lies that we need to counter in helping get over this problem. People create idols because they want a God they can control. By being able to control the thing that gives them what they want, they get it when they want it. It's very simple logic. It works great. It makes perfect sense. God is not like that. We don't control God. We don't get from him what we want. Sometimes we can try. An irony is that we can turn God into an idol. If you understand what a person's getting after, God can be another one of those things that we use to obtain what we want. And I think that's why that possibly is so infuriating to God, because it's a very demeaning, it's a very degrading thing to do to something or someone, to put them in that position. So we are like Israelites. As Christians, we still like to control our God. And if we can't, we make one. So when it comes to fearing people, it's the people that are the ones that we feel like we need something from, and therefore we become controlled by them. Someone once said, "We never expected that using people to meet our desires leaves us enslaved to them." So what are some steps to take in helping to communicate this principle? Number one, this is step one, but it doesn't mean it's, I hope you understand what I'm trying to get to here. It's a way of distinguishing one step from another step. It doesn't mean you have to check off one before you can get to two. But in a way, it probably could be helpful. Use the heart model to explain how the heart works and how idolatry works. Okay, what's the heart model? Maybe some of you are here for the first time. What is that? I'm not going to take time to explain it. That would be about half of this topic. So Ben did a great job of illustrating that in great detail. So I'd recommend listening or watching his topic on communication from today, and there was a awesome depiction of how this all works. So what you're going to do then is, first you've got to understand it yourself, then you're going to explain it to your friend. The second one is explain James 1:14 and 15, which illustrates the process of idolatry. I'm going to put up a little diagram here. If you can get some of that down on paper, fine. Otherwise, it's in some of the things I referred to in your notebook there. One of the little pocket seminars that's in the, if it hasn't sold out, it's on the back table. It's called Misplaced Values, I think. Oh, it's the worship one. There's misled worship and misplaced values. Both of them are, I think, from last year's HPIN. And it's in, this process is in one of those. Just thumb through it, you'll see it. So what does James 1:14 to 15 say? But one is tempted by one's own desire, being lured and enticed by it. Then, when that desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin, and that sin, when it's fully grown, gives birth to death. Now, this little diagram kind of expands that process. It's not literally 7 steps or 3 steps, or it's kind of a morphing process that happens to simple ideas, simple things that are desired turn into lusts. Lusts are present. We think about them and we make a decision. I've got to have it. And when we make that decision that we've got to have it, it becomes, we think, as a need. We make a demand on our idol, the person we've chosen, to deliver that to us, and then we expect them to give it to us. When they don't give it to us, we become disappointed, and then we punish them for not giving it to us and start the whole cycle over again. And eventually, either that person just gets out of the relationship, or things change, or we get tired of them and we try to find another idol and start the process over again. But James says eventually that brings us to death. It can be either death of a relationship, spiritual death, physical death. It can result in some really serious conditions. So that's the idolatry process. That would be really helpful to help that person understand how did he get where he's at? Why is he fearing this? So to do that, give them some homework. Homework is an assignment you would give to do outside of your meeting time. So you could ask him, for example, go home, study the word worship, get your concordance out, whatever you want to use. In the Old Testament, find 10 verses describe worship, how God feels about worship. They give them, there's many more, but make it reasonable. A reasonable assignment. And literally have them copy down the verses into their notebook. Notebook is one of the essential pieces of working with someone so that both you and them have a way to write down things. So in their notebook, write down those 10 verses and be ready to bring that to your next meeting. When he brings that to your next meeting, review it, sit down with him, go over it with him. What did you come up with? What 10 verses did you come up with? So you start going through them, every one of them. What do you think this verse meant? Discuss with them. What did it do to you? What did it say to you? Help it expand his understanding. So as you're discussing these, you may pick up some things as he says what it means to him, and take notes. Take notes of what it means to him. So you're gaining an understanding of what this concept, how is he getting it? Is he even getting it? Does he even understand what it means? So you get feedback. That's the process of teaching. You get feedback. You can find out, how is he doing? Where is he going with it? Again, the next homework assignment, do the same thing, only with idol and other gods. There's a lot of verses that deal with how God felt about other gods. That's typically the phrase used. Again, have him copy 10 verses, come back to the next meeting, and we'll talk about them. Review the homework again. Use it to discuss how he perceives that God perceives other gods. Or what do some verses say about idols? Eventually they should get an idea, some kind of foggy picture that this isn't good. So you're not there yet, you're not the end, but you're building up a foundation of how to communicate things to him. It's helping him get tuned to God's heart about idolatry, about other gods and what they are. But remember, don't preach. Don't just say, this is what it means, this is what this verse means, this is what it is. That's preaching. Teaching is asking. Here's your assignment, what did you get out of it? So you can interact. And again, another one is have him review his own life and see if there are things that he can put in those categories. So, as you've discussed idols and other gods, this step would be see if he can make the connection of something in his life that might match up with this concept of other gods and idols. You notice how you're gradually working into this and gradually educating him in what this means. And for the next homework then, have him list 7 such things in his notebook. 7 things he can connect in his own life for these things. Now, don't get on him if he doesn't. Maybe he might come up with 1. Well, then that's great. He might not come up with 7. And he might honestly not come up with any. So I wouldn't think punishment is needed for not doing the homework unless you just said, I didn't want to do it. Then you might have to deal with that some way. But if he says, I just couldn't get it, I can't bring them together, then that gives you another avenue, another way, another direction to go to help flesh that out better, devising more homework to keep it going. So, again, review the homework, discuss his findings, expand his understanding. It's kind of that cycle. Principle 2, fear reveals what one values. This is similar to worship because what we value, we worship. But again, we want to help him get a connection to these various terms and how they relate to each other. Matthew 6:21 records one of the most profound statements Jesus gave about this. He said, "For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also." He's equating what's treasured, what's valued with the heart. It's the connection point. It's where it happens. So the values that he has are the things we believe are the most important that we need, things that we have. It's what drives us. And as you may have heard the phrase value systems. It's just a fancy term for a set of values. And we all have them. Everyone in this room has a value system, a set of values. Where you got them is very diverse, but we all got them. And they're the ones that they drive how we interpret life. They are what gives us and helps direct how we respond to things that happen to us. So in a sense, it defines how we'll think, speak, and act. And they also form our worldview. They're part of that. And that's how we interpret what goes on around us. So when Jesus warned people about this, that when our value system is based on created things, it's a problem. And that's where in Mark 7, he lists a number of very bad things that proceed out of the heart of man. And that's what we're talking about here. So, steps to take. Number 1, take the time to help your friend understand his own heart's value system. It may take quite a bit of work, quite a bit of, maybe a little bit of interaction, some give and take, and maybe a few sessions of homework to build up the concept of how this really works and how we can tie the two together. But help him understand what he's valuing, what he thinks is important. So again, that's that same homework and review and discuss cycle. And here's a couple, I put together this little diagram following connections. These are, I like to try to simplify things, bring them down to an easy level to understand. So I'm going to give this little diagram here. The heart worships what it values, and values equal treasures. Okay? That's a piece of this. The heart worships what it values or what it treasures. Now, if what it values and what it treasures is God, then that will result in peace, confidence, and strength. If what the heart values and treasures are other gods, then that results in idols being created, sin, fear, anxiety, and death. Okay, and a whole lot more things. I didn't have space to list them all, but about every topic we've had in this seminar could be listed on here. A simple graphic to help them remember the chain of events here in the heart and how they connect and how they interact. So that could be an assignment, you know, lay that out for him on one of your talks together, discuss it, see that he can maybe repeat it back to you. Yeah, I kind of get it. And then, again, devise some homework to help him identify his values. It might be repeated. It's okay to repeat things because as you repeat things, people learn them better. And even if he complains about, well, I just did this last week, well, why are we doing it again? And help him have courage. It's going to take a while, but we'll get there. Step 4, review the homework, discuss what he values. Help him identify harmful ones that may be related to fear. Now you're starting to connect some of these things that may be abstract concepts are now being brought into a little more clarity so that he can start to maybe get a grasp that how they're actually affecting him, what's going on, and connect the thing that's happening to him. As you get there and as these start coming together, now you can start helping him shift his focus. Learn what these things are, learn to recognize them. Remember, these are the values that are harmful. So review them and help them get more entrenched. And I'm going to actually suggest that they get written down in his notebook. Make a list. As you discuss them, you write them down, have him write them down. You might come up with a list of 2, 3, 10, actually able to find words for them and write them down. Because then they become more than just abstract thoughts. They're able to be identified on paper, and because you discuss them enough. So the idea here, the intent here is to start shifting the focus from the other gods that he's identified to the God that he needs to worship, and it's not going to be a one meeting. It's going to take time, slow time. Maybe take steps forward, and there'll be take steps back, and a little bit more, maybe a little bit less, and that's where the process. They need courage. They need encouragement along the way to keep going. And I think one thing that's helpful is to have a really good, patient-friendly attitude with it in that process. So get familiar with this simple process: homework, review, and dialogue. And you're going to be just. That's what it says here too. Learn where they are, learn how to recognize them, practice changing, and then repeat that process for each one of the ones that he's going to identify. Third principle, fear reflects an inaccurate view of God. In Matthew 6:25-34, it's a long passage. I don't want to read it all right now, but verse 30, he said, "If God cares so wonderfully for wildflowers that are here today and thrown into the fire tomorrow, he will certainly care for you. Why do you have so little faith?" So what's the point here? What's the logic that Jesus is trying to teach? You remember that it's the passage about how God feeds the sparrows and the little, the flowers of the field, and he dresses them and talks about Solomon. But so Jesus is trying to help us reason out the value that God places on the human creation. So it's going to help us evaluate not only ourselves and what our value is, but it gives us an idea of how God thinks about it. It's a little bit of a glimpse into who God is, what he's like, and his treatment of creation. So the logic is this: if God takes care of the things in creation that are of lesser value than humans, then he will take care of humans, and therefore your friend. And we know that humans are of higher value than the rest of the created things. That has value too, but humans are of a higher value because Jesus himself came to redeem them. He came to give instruction. He gave 3 years of instruction to his disciples and everybody else who would listen. And then he sacrificed himself for humans. So there's no animals that got a sacrifice like that. And not even angels got a sacrifice like that. So that helps us understand how God feels, what he's like in terms of how he thinks about humans. And hopefully as the person starts connecting that to themselves, then that can help them have a little more understanding of his position, literally in God's eyes, and help alleviate the fear that comes from an inaccurate view of God. Again, there's some steps to take. I would bet that you're probably going to guess what some of them might include. So your friend needs to walk with him. You need to walk with your friend to develop a clearer, more accurate understanding of the nature of God. That's your job. That's your role as a teacher, your tutor. This is now the focus. It's helping him better get a stronger understanding of who God is and his nature. So it's going to take some ingenuity. I didn't list things here, but think about it. Pray about it. Ask for little ways to assign homework that he can do that will illustrate a particular point. God has a lot of attributes, and a lot of them are described in the Bible. So you can go down a short list of them and have them be studied and become familiar with them. And all the while, you're interacting with him, trying to bring them together to reality. And that's a challenge, is to take theology and mesh it into real life and make it real in your friend's life. So obviously, if you're going to do that for your friend, you've already had to do that for yourself. You've got to be there in your own self, have confidence and understand the reality of who God is and how he feels about you personally, to have even the confidence to be able to teach this to somebody else. So, devise some homework, illustrate the concepts about God's nature, give him homework again, and bring it back for the next meeting, review the homework, discuss what he came up with, and adjust it again. Homework is always part of your meetings. It's the common thread through all of your meetings is this homework thread. So that probably will illustrate to you, it'll maybe illuminate some of the lies he's had about God. Things he's been believing falsely about God that may be contributing to his fear of things and fear of people. So ask him questions about how he understands God's nature. And this may progress over a number of meetings, that at first it may be very little, and then as you discuss it and interact and give some illumination, it hopefully will grow. And the goal is to help him understand how God views his own creation and his own people that he designed and built and redeemed. And as you discuss these things, again, create a list. Have him create his own list of his fallacies that he's believing, and use that as your plan for interacting as time goes on. Use it in your continuing discussions as you have with him. So the idea then is discussing and understanding the truth about how God feels about people and creation, and revealing how he may be wrong about how he understood God to feel about those things, think about those things, how he is, and then make them real. Meaning, it's one thing to discuss them and kind of vaguely say, well, I think I might have had that view. Well, bring it down to reality by putting it on paper. And by putting it on paper, you've got to come up with some words to put it on paper accurately. So that helps flesh it out better. And then you're going to help him match them up. Match his lies up with the truth. You're walking through him to help him create a list of truths, and you're walking with him to help him create a list of lies. Help him merge them together. Help him neutralize the lies with the truths that you've helped him see. Fourth principle, fear is related to a mistrust in God. Some of these may overlap, and that's okay. They probably are interactive. They probably do overlap. But a lack of trust is a matter of choice. Our ability to trust God is largely a personal decision. And it's not entirely needing to be based on the amount of information we have about God. God can stand up to any level of scrutiny. It boils down to, as Jesus put it, us of little faith. So he didn't state that God owed us more information in which to make our choice of trust. We have it already. Matthew 8 records several instances that Jesus described the way he and God the Father care for and interact with humanity. So faith and trust are interwoven. Now, I'm saying this having just said you're helping him basically pull more information out of the Scripture and become more familiar with it. So that's why this is a little bit different point, because he may become very knowledgeable about the attributes of God that are very well said, and he can write them down and know them well. Now he needs to be brought to a point of choice. What am I going to do with that? There's various conversations and encounters that Jesus had with people in various situations, and in there I put a little table of a little bit of these from various of the gospel accounts. And I think some of those little stories, they're very short. You can't really get a lot out of them, but he does cover a number of different areas of life, such as physical sickness, spiritual oppression, financial security, spiritual warfare, others. As you look at the conversations, you see his response to ordinary people with deep troubles and sorrows. In each of the situations, Jesus wanted his disciples to understand a key truth about life, that they lacked the power to control the outcome, but God was powerful. So in our anxiety, we tend to focus on the problem. We tend to focus on what we can see and what we think we can do about it. So I think that's what Jesus was trying to illustrate, perhaps, is that that's futile. You're not going to change it. So what we need, what he needs, your friend needs, and I need, you need, is a different view of our problems. And also to choose to trust God, who is over all of them. And I think that was part of what I liked about Ben's illustration. He started out at the top with God, and God is sovereign over all of this. So ultimately, we kind of burrow back up through all the circumstances and get to God, and we can have confidence in God. And I think that's where we need to help our friend get to as well. And it doesn't come overnight. So we need to help them connect the dots between the circumstances that we face and God's demonstrated faithfulness to his people in those circumstances, and then choose to trust God in them. So this is getting to a little harder. It's still going to take homework, but this is where it's not a matter of learning, it's a matter of a person trying to decide what he's going to do. So you could assign homework to review any 5 conversations from perhaps that list that I gave you, Matthew 8 and 9, and extract the stated or implied solutions, and then discuss how to apply them in his life today. That'll take some thinking. I didn't lay that all out for you, but it's trying to give a little nudge of some idea where to go. And help your friend describe in his own words the various circumstances he faces in which he is fearing and how he views God's involvement in them. So help him describe in his own words. That's a key thing. You don't describe it for him. You don't tell him. Have him describe his circumstances in his words. And have him describe in his words how he views God and his involvement in them. That could be a challenge. And that can reveal some things about what the person really is, where he's at with God and with circumstances. Help him describe his fears. So now having, what was that last one? The circumstances in his own words. Now we're getting into, he's asked you to help him with his fears. So help him describe them. Again, this notebook's got to be out and pencil ready to write. Just these things as you discuss, don't let them go away into the air without getting captured. Both him and you. Because I think that's a key to learning. It's a key to making it more solid when you can actually put them on paper. Or if he likes to use an iPad, he could do that too. Or a notebook. So describe how each relates to his level of trust in God. Again, you're helping him connect dots. Describing his circumstances, describing his fears. How do they relate? And then how do they relate to what he's learned about the nature of God? And you may find the previous lies creeping back in, and part of the explanations that he might put down might include some of those lies that you thought he had a grasp of. But it's going to take a while for a person to get rid of those lies, to stop believing them. If it takes years to put them in, they're going to take a while to get them out and exchange them for truth. It's like putting off the old man, putting on the new. It's a process. Step 4, discuss his heart condition for each item on his list from step 3. Remember, step 3 was listing his fears, describing them, and again, I'm not saying this as many times now, but this involves homework. Of course, you're going to describe it some, but you don't want a 2-hour meeting. You don't want to take lots of hours of trying to discuss and hash all this out. It's good to follow a conversation as you think it needs to, but you can also get distracted and get on rabbit trails. And assigning homework helps keep you on track and keep you in the right direction. So now we're getting into maybe even more concretely seeing how this comes out of the heart and helping him understand that. And then you're going to start investigating and pursuing reasons and ways to change how he views those circumstances and fears. Now that maybe he's getting a grasp of all of this, of worship and idols and other gods and his own values and the fears and the circumstances. And this may take months to get through all of this. But if they're coming together, they're coalescing, then start shifting into finding reasons and ways to change them. Again, you're not the one who's going to tell him that. You're going to investigate that together with him. You might have to bring up a few suggestions and steer it a little bit, but the key is getting him to think of them and to invest his thought process into it and his heart into it. Number one, does he want to? Number two, how to? So continue to work with your friend to recognize ways God is relevant to his fears. And that's done by connecting all of what I just said, the truths that oppose the lies that he used to believe that caused the fears. So use biblical, personal, or other illustrations to focus on God's trustworthiness. I'm a person who's a little bit, at my age, I guess I've tired somewhat of cliches. And I cautioned against this in the first topic I had of things that are, I can't think of the word now, but standard phrases and maybe even biblical truths that are just, just pray and read the Bible more. Okay, both of those are true, but stay away from those simplistic types of things and get more specific. Devise ways. That's your job, is to be creative in a way to get him to think and to tie these things together. And as you get to know him, you know things that will turn him off and know things that he'll be more receptive to. And then the next part is practicing what you're coming up with. Practice correcting trust levels in specific situations that come up. So if he's had, for example, he's had a fear of being honest with his wife because he fears what she might think of him, okay, now you've got some material for homework, because likely he's still living with his wife, and so from between the time you end your meeting and you meet again, he might have some time with his wife. So now he's got the opportunity to try some of this, that he's putting together, his ways that he can be specifically apply what principles he's been learning from you. Ways to change from a lack of trust to trust. Not only God, but maybe the person that he was fearing. Give him homework to journal, and journaling is a primary tool in something like this, where you don't know how, you're not going to be listening to all his conversations between now and the next meeting. So have him journal the things that go on. If he had a conversation with his wife and write down the time and date and the subject and what was discussed and how did he react? What did he do? Did he fear that? Did he have sensations of fear that he had to push down? Did he push them down, or did he act on them? Did he do the same thing he always does and either lie or evade or whatever the problem is? Did he do that, or did he try? Did he push into it and do better? So that's what the journal does. He can bring that back and you can discuss it. So, and another example here, if he had defined God as being untrustworthy in a particular situation, use that as a focus of the discussion and the homework to identify that. Maybe he went to work and he had a stressful time, and sometimes when we're in stressful situations, we're not thinking logically through all the, what does God think about this and all that, and we're just, maybe the emotions get flared up and we react. But by journaling that, just what it is, he may not be able to think through that logically, but by journaling the event, bringing it back, and you two can sit down and talk about it, and then after the fact start thinking, well, why did you do that? What can you remember what you were thinking? And maybe he wouldn't have thought of it then, but later in the meeting, he can think, I was feeling kind of fearful. I wasn't sure what was going to happen, and I thought, I remember thinking that I've often thought that God lets me down. So here was another situation, and I had to fight that. So that's an example of how you could bring that back and discuss it. The last principle, fear is redirected by serving others. And this is not the only problem that can be helped by serving others. And I hope that serving others is not just a tool used to get out of problems. I hope it really becomes part of us. It's a common human problem to really serve well. At least maybe I'm revealing something of myself. So as we face circumstances we're generally very self-focused, we talked about. We're fixated on how our circumstances will affect us and when our circumstances, excuse me, and we become anxious. Anxiety gives way to fear, and fear leads to all sorts of poor behaviors. So this is just a bunch of kind of rehashing what I've already said about fear. But because it's self-focused, what's an obvious way to get the focus off of self is to put it on someone else. And not in a negative way, but in a positive way. Serving others can be a way to redirect our focus from ourselves and our fears and the circumstances that we don't understand to doing something for someone else. So your homework then, you can give him, or you can sit down with him and determine ways that he can focus himself outward. Develop a list of things to do for others. This is literally a list on paper in his notebook, and you're copying it too. To develop things that are tuned to things he can do, things that, and it may start off kind of simple, things that aren't scary, that he can actually have courage to do. And then help him develop a plan or goal to actually do those things. So he may put down on the list, go mow the lawn for the neighbor that he's had struggles with, had a poor relationship with. Okay, that's nice to put that on the paper. Mow the lawn for Sam. Well, step 2 then is, let's plan this out. When are you going to do this? Let's actually put this on paper. You're committing to this. I got a note of it here. And so next Saturday, you're going to do that. This is what you're going to accomplish. So, and then possibly, if needed, and if maybe there's a big one he'd like to accomplish, but it looks really, really scary, then you might go with him to accomplish that one thing. And then help him over using the means I've discussed to establish patterns and habits of looking for ways to help others. So you start off together, and then as he grows in this, becomes more of a growing thing where he starts looking more and more for ways and things to do, and to make concrete plans to do them. And then help him train himself not to overload himself in the plans either that are too grand. There's going to be limits to what he's going to do. All of us have limits of what either our personality or our means have. We can all do something, but not all the same things. So he may need some help in making sure he doesn't overload himself with too grand of schemes and too big of an idea. Or the opposite, keeping the things that he's doing too simple and too easy. Because eventually you do want to grow and strengthen in what he's doing. So a couple conclusions here. First of all, to review these principles, fear reveals what one worships. Fear reveals what one values. Fear reflects an inaccurate view of God. Fear is related to a trust or a mistrust in God. And fear is redirected by serving others. So remember that while some of these principles may not be new, the new things you'll be doing is to walk with them as they learn them. It's a long road. And remember, this is just a piece of the bigger picture. But you never know, depending on how difficult this is entrenched in this person, that may be enough to free him up. or it may be just the beginning of a longer process. So I wouldn't want to say that you do these 5 things and he's going to be all set. But I think you'd be a lot farther ahead in at least having a foundation of communication so you can understand principles of how it works. It's just like if you and your friend were trying to work on an engine and you understood the mechanics of the engine, but he didn't. In order to communicate to him, if you want him to do something for you, you need to kind of explain how they work and, you know, how wrenches work and all that stuff. Same idea. So to conclude with this, in a simple matter, the fear of man is in the heart. The heart can change. God changes the heart, but you're the tool he uses. And all the while, think tutoring. Don't preach. Tutor. Teach them. So God bless you if you dive into your friend's heart and bring him health, strength, and courage.